Good morning. Thank you all for getting up while it was still dark to come in here this morning. Couple of housekeeping notes real quick. I do have a microphone up here. This is being broadcast and recorded, so if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll try to get the mic down to you. Otherwise, I'm going to repeat the question. Probably will anyway, but we've got it. The other thing is, I feel warm in here. I was told it's gonna probably kick in automatically, so I apologize if anybody's uncomfortable. And please do ask questions. We've got a lot to cover this morning, so I'm gonna dive right in. So I presume everybody in the room knows RF's important, right? If it's good, your life's happy. If it's not, it can be really miserable. So we're going to talk a little bit about RF, what's changed. We're going to talk about site surveys a little bit. And then I was going to go over some good old tried and true ground with RF grouping, which I've been getting a lot of questions on and I've seen issues with lately. And then we're also going to talk about FRA this morning. How many of you are deploying 3800s or 2800s at this point? Excellent. How many of you have looked at the C9800s? More of you should get by the World of Solutions. Those of you who know me, I don't recommend things that I think you're going to not want to send me a Christmas card after, or things like that, because I do the job as well. But there's a lot of promise there. You may be tempted to look at the C9800 and say, oh, it's that Polaris stuff. It is not Polaris. We've been working really hard on it. I've got it running at home. It's definitely worth taking a look at. How many of you know what the C9800 is? That's a little better. For those of you that don't, it's basically you can run a controller. It's like the old virtual WLC. Only it's on steroids, and it was what centralized, where converged access was supposed to be. So there's new software, new hardware. We keep expanding very quickly on technologies, and the next round we're going to talk about quite a bit in here. Wi-Fi 6 is coming, and I'm impressed with it. But over the years, and it's not been long, we've seen running up from 802.11. How many of you were doing this when it was 802.11b only? So you know the pain, yes? Current product line. Everything that we've got right now, the 1850, 1830, 1850s, the 15s are nice. How many of you have deployed the 1815s? Just a couple of people. You know what we use them for here and at other shows is any place we don't get coverage because the booth went up, man, you throw one of them little things in, life is happy again. 2800, 3800, and a 4800. How many of you deployed a 4800 yet? Okay. And then the outdoor line. So everything is at least up to 802.11 AC at this point. And what's changed? Well, in '97, you had one spatial stream, single 20 megahertz channel. We advanced through 802.11n in about 2005. And there was a lot of years between that. From 2012 to present, it seems like there's been a new standard about every 3 years, right? And of course, that comes with new radios. And I've heard it from customers before. It's like, why do we have to buy a new AP? Well, the radios have gotten a ton better. It used to be really, really hard to do high density. It's not that that's simple anymore, but follow a few rules, it goes pretty good now. We had high densities of people, for instance, the keynote. How many of you were in London when we were in London? Anybody? Yeah. But you work here. We melted the keynote down in 2011. Because at the last minute, somebody changed their mind on what they were going to do and needed just a connection, right? And then the keynote failed, and 10 minutes after that, I had this lecture. And it was a long 2 hours. All right, so deploying with spectrum in mind. This is the baseband, it's the physical layer. I like to say if you don't have a good foundation, you can't build a good building. The Leaning Tower of Pisa would not be a tourist attraction had the foundation been laid correctly, right? Focus has got to be on the fixed infrastructure. That's not always easy because you've got mobility in your environments. And just for a quick reference, I like to ask a lot of questions. How many in here are in healthcare? Just a quick show of hands. Higher ed? Okay. Public enterprise? Office space? Good. All right. We have managers in here? Oh, okay, I'll be good. About site surveys. How many of you have done a site survey recently or had one done? That is picking way up. I'm glad to see it. You'd be surprised the number of people I still run into that have not done a site survey. They were like, well, we did one. When did you do that? It's 2003. And we try with all these new technologies to make things fit in the same space, and I think we do a pretty good job of it. You know, we've added antennas, spatial streams to keep the same size pattern so that you can unplug an AP and plug another one back in. That's not an easy trick. And it's probably going to get a little more interesting for us. I've seen the new product coming out. We're still doing it pretty good. Of course, we've also gotten denser too. If you still have the same spacing on APs that you did back in 802.11g days, before we even went to A, you've already had problems. And that's probably why you did a site survey. So technologies change, things change, your missions change. As wireless has gotten more prevalent or actually more reliable, we've seen more and more people get on it. How many people do you have now that are looking for a plug? Anybody? They've got a server, they are, but if they're walking around with their devices, man, they don't want anything to do with a wire. So that means we've been good. We've done it. But what can go wrong? Anybody here deploying large campuses? Lots of very similar buildings? Make a cookie cutter. All you have to do is replicate that pattern across it. Exact same thing. This came from a university in the US, and their dorms were all built at the same time. And they made some assumptions, and they did the spacing, and they had a pattern, and they went to implementing. And they were doing an every other room pattern. And they were stacking them. In the top one, they were going to cover every room and let RRM sort it out, or stack the APs or offset the APs. Well, these guys got deploying, and things did not work well. One building had really thick floors, and the next building had really, really thick walls. And the upshot, sorry, went too fast on that. The upshot was these patterns right here. If you take a look, how many of you use Ekahau? I'm going to talk about them a little bit here this morning because I really like that product. I don't know if you know, but if you build a 3D building and you do a survey, you can turn the APs on the other floors and you can see the penetration. It's really a handy trick if you're wondering about how thick your walls are or how thick your floors are. These guys weren't doing surveys. Of course, it adds cost. You don't want to survey every single building. But in the end, they didn't have so good a coverage, and they didn't get into the other room. So there's a paper up on deploying dorms. Anybody doing that recently? Nope. Good. All right, so you got to know your buildings. Ekahau's newest product, and this has been around for a long time. I don't know if any of you know that you can export the Ekahau drawing, the plan, and all the walls and things that you've done within that, and you can import that directly into Prime. And Prime will take that, it'll make a hierarchy out of that. You can put the campus, the building, the floors, and all of the architecture that you drew in there. And what that gives you is a well-scaled map and the AP placement. The APs are going to come up in planner mode, and you get a choice. When you import, and excuse me, I apparently have caught what they're calling the fear of cold, so I may, and I woke up with it this morning just for effect, I guess. When you import, it's going to come up as a plan, And you're going to be able to see the floor without any AP placement. The planned APs are in the planner on Prime. And then there's a facility to match that to the MAC addresses, or you could put the AP names and the MAC addresses in a CSV file, put it into the same zip that the export's in, and it'll come in, and all your APs, if they're on the system, will match up and appear. So it does save a little bit of time. In 9.2, and I think we're at 9.25, we do have Bluetooth planning. All of our current APs are in there. There is a Bluetooth planning mode. So if it's an AP that has a built-in Bluetooth, the thumb Bluetooth adapter that goes into some of the older APs, that one just went over for the antennas inclusion, and it'll be available probably next week. I'll get a patch file for it. Interference detection beta, that's actually something brand new. How many of you seen their Sidekick? Okay, you've seen the spectrum the Sidekick develops. They wrote some stuff, actually it's better than the MetaGeek stuff presently, but pattern matching, it's rudimentary. It's not the same as Clean Air, but it gives you an idea of where interference is if you're not used to looking at spectrograms. And then they've got a lot of new improvements, and of course they're running on Mac now, which the Mac version, the latest 9.2 version, they changed the Java version, and it's running really well on the Mac. So get over to World of Solutions and take a look at it. Tools. Comparing apples to apples, have you guys ever seen 3 engineers measuring the same thing with 3 different tools and starting to argue about why they got different results? You can get 3 engineers with the same tool measuring the same thing, and because of the different start and stop times, you're going to get different results. And you can spend a lot of time complaining about that, or you can standardize on the tools. Free tools, nothing's ever free. Good tools, if you've got them consistently, but don't try to measure things with multiple tools because they do not work the same. So it's not as important as what you use. It's really important that you use it consistently. And I always recommend an external adapter. I have literally seen 3 of the same model laptop with 3 different antenna patterns and 3 different radios in it just because they were 3 months apart. So you get different components, you won't get consistent results. Of course, you can merge all your results together with Ekahau and a couple other tools. If you're going to do that, base it on something like the Sidekick or an external adapter that you know what the range is. Planning tools, extremely useful for gaining a concept. I use it a lot. Our virtual CSEs use it a lot. This place right here, when we designed it, we didn't even have the antenna yet, and we did the entire thing planned. I actually used, in the big halls, I used the old stadium antenna, the Gillaroo, and it had a 35-degree aperture, which the Grayling, the new one, or the old one was a Grayling, the new one's a Gillaroo. All these fish. And it was 35 degrees at 2.4, so we laid it out with that. When we finally got the antenna, the first production sample I got, it was 31 degrees. So I spent about 20 hours juggling around APs and positions, and I finally got it in with only about a 5% increase. But the plan was good. Somebody once said, all models are wrong, some of them are useful. They really are useful. If you're careful with your planning tools, you plan in the middle, you give a lot of leeway on either side, which you should be doing with Wi-Fi anyway, you'll get good results. It won't look exactly like that when you're done, but I've never had a problem if I did a good plan. I've never had a problem I couldn't tune out fairly easily and leave a lot of dynamic room. What's not changed? Interference is still a problem. We've got some of that going on in here right now. Some of the house APs have given us problems. Everybody had a decent experience with Wi-Fi here so far? Any notable problems? Were you guys in the keynote yesterday? Yeah, how was the Wi-Fi in there? Good? Excellent, that was my job. I should have slept really good last night, but not so much. I was coming to see you guys this morning, and I was nervous about it. I think I was excited. So, at any rate, duty cycle, still our #1 thing, airtime utilization. Interference is important. Non-Wi-Fi interference, while it's growing less, it actually makes me complacent, and when I actually find non-Wi-Fi interference, it's usually after I've ruled out everything else. It's no longer the first thing I look for, but it's there. Channel utilization. How many of you have seen high channel utilization but didn't really understand its roots? There's 3 metrics on the controller. There's transmit and receive utilization. That's your radio. Channel utilization is the measurement of the channel, and the Cisco channel utilization is a loaded metric, meaning we are copying all of the frames that we can understand. We're putting in all of those weight states, the navs, the CWs that come from those frames, and we start an internal clock. So there's a period of time, obviously, that we can't transmit. And then you add to that the listen before talk feature, the CCA threshold, and we count the amount of space that's left on the other side. A lot of those values are built on the QBSS value that comes from the clients. So when we count that up, it's a loaded metric, and it's the real picture. The inverse of channel utilization is your transmit op. So if you get up to around 60% channel utilization in a really well-tuned network, we get about 65% before things start to fall apart. Once you get up to where you've only got 35 or 40% left of the network, it's a pretty quick trip to 75 or 80%. That's gotten a lot better over the years with the technology. We're going to talk about Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax today. I think we're about to make some really good breakthroughs in efficiency. So, non-Wi-Fi interference, that's the most devious. And how many of you are familiar with the Clean Air product? Ever look at Spectrum? Because it's fun? Good. It's still important, and I still hear a lot of people asking for it, even though it's an old part of the product. You'll be happy to know every AP we've got coming out in the future has got Clean Air in it. We still think it's really, really important. The reason it's so insidious is because it'll break your Wi-Fi network in a couple of ways. Wi-Fi, for all of its improvements and all of the noise canceling and all of the ability to punch through noise that we built into the new radios, it's still listen before talk, and if something else is talking, you're not going to talk, and it's going to impact your performance. The other thing that non-Wi-Fi interference will do, particularly in 2.4, which we're going to go back into, is it'll just ruin your signal to noise ratio. You usually see it in 2.4 because there's more devices that operate there. But recently we've had fun things like phone systems that use backhaul trunking over the air. I've seen channel 36, the entire Uni 1 with an 80 megahertz channel wiped out because 2 of these repeaters that everybody's carrying around a small phone that ties to their system, all these guys got radios now. That's 900 megahertz. But there's guys that come in, they have their own private phone system, they hang them up and wipe out 4 channels in a hall. So it's still out there. What you'll see is you'll see very high duty cycle or high channel utilization happening on the channel. I should probably walk around out here. High channel utilization, but you won't see any metrics for Wi-Fi. Has anybody here encountered LTE in our spectrum yet? LTE just released LTE LAA, and there was the LTE-U controversy going on for a while, but I think that's pretty much dead. LTE LAA is a carrier mechanism that allows a carrier to use their private spectrum for the uplink and then use Wi-Fi channels for the downlink. Why? Because Part 97 in the FCC and also in ETSI for your rules, we have to accept all interference. We can't interfere with anything, and if anything else is operating, we have to yield to it. That's how we got the Wi-Fi bans. The carriers have come down and they've said, you know what? Gosh, you guys got a lot of spectrum there, and you're not using it very efficiently. So they are legal now in the Uni 1 channels to start downlinking. You guys are lucky because ETSI is the only regulatory that said you must use a contention mechanism. So at least in Europe, you've got an LBT mechanism built into that, and it will yield. You can have coexistence. Of course, if you have two radios coexisting on the same channel, you're each going to work out about half the bandwidth. So you will see a performance impact. If you go to your system to take a look at it, this stuff looks exactly like Wi-Fi. If they're in a 20 megahertz channel, you cannot tell the difference between that and Wi-Fi, even in a spectrogram, and you won't see any Wi-Fi metrics. You're just going to see the duty cycle cranked up and your channel's going to be closed. I've seen it in Asia already where they were doing a deployment, and they weren't using listen before talking. They won every single contention window. It just shut down the Wi-Fi. So just be aware of that, and that's kind of why I'm still harping on that. What happens if you get something that's using all your spectrum and not working through a contention mechanism? You stop. Your AP stops, your clients will stop, everybody stops. So clean air is being taught now, all of the new interference sources, and hopefully very soon we're going to recognize LTE. EDRM will still work, so if we recognize something that's non-Wi-Fi and it's taken out your channel, we can switch channels within 30 seconds from the AP and then let RRM sort it out on the back end. What's changed since we released it, and the same for RRM, if we change a channel for radar or for interference or for any other reason, we now do something called a mini DCA. Instead of just chucking it out of the way and put it on another channel, which potentially could put you in contention with another one of your own APs, we pick the second best channel. We try to pick the clearest channel after that. So these mechanisms are going to become more important. Non-Wi-Fi interference, what you're looking at on the screen right up here. Oh, I forgot. Sorry, top button is the pointer. That middle button makes the slide go. That was a jammer, but it could have been Bluetooth, it could have been a bunch of BLE. And how that jammer works, it just ruins the signal-to-noise ratio. It paints it with white noise, right? I have seen electrical devices do this, so just do be aware of it. If you're getting unexplained performance hits, take a look at the clean air. If you lose signal-to-noise ratio now, you lose everything. What can you see with spectrum? These are old shots, but you can see very distinct channels, very clean spectrum. That's 2.4 just about anywhere where it's over deployed, and there's actually a microwave in the middle of that one. This the radio can hear, that the radio can't discern anything. That is a microwave right here in the FIRA, and that was out in Hall 3. They've got all those nice restaurants along the sides. That's a commercial microwave, and it took all 3 channels out, all the way from 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was pretty busy right through about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is one of my favorites. This happened a couple of years ago. This was in a transit system. And they had radios in, they had Wi-Fi in, old Wi-Fi. They went out, they proof of concept with the 3700s. Everything worked great. At the last minute, they decided to use the 2700s. Where they were mounting this is in, of course, it's an underground transit system, so you don't start core drilling. You have to mount where they have places to mount. And it was mounted in the same physical proximity as the cellular antennas. Shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, when they put it in, it actually performed worse than the old Wi-Fi. And they went around for about 2 months. And in the end analysis, it was in fact cellular, but it wasn't the cellular band overcrossing into the Wi-Fi bands. It was the energy from that cellular making every component inside our radio ring and put 2 really nice points of interference. That right there is a cellular, or the results of it. And that would drive, because it was 100% utilization, it would drive our utilization right through the roof. And of course, if we got high utilization, we don't transmit, because you can't. You got to stand back. The difference between the 2700 and the 3700 was the 3700 was built to have an LTE module in it. So there are filters near the band edges to take that out. And when they went with the 2700, the filters didn't work. So bad interference is still out there. All right. RRM, Radio Resource Management. We've done a pretty good job with RRM accommodating 80 megahertz channels, 160 megahertz channels. How many people in here are deploying 80 megahertz channels? Good. Hopefully in an isolated environment. We generally recommend now about 40 megahertz channels, and particularly here in Europe, you're burning them pretty fast. Just keep in mind, if you're deploying 3800s and you decide you want dual 5 gigahertz, because anybody in here have to deploy 2.4 gigahertz still? I am so sorry. Nobody gets that there's only 3 channels, do they? I know. At any rate, if you are going to deploy a 3800 and you're going to use dual 5 gigahertz, keep in mind at an 80 megahertz bandwidth, you are now using 8 channels per AP. You guys have 16 usable ones here. Anybody got Uni 3 opened up in their domain? The Uni 3 channels? Nope. UK? Sweden? That's the other one I heard about. That was last fall, wasn't it? I'm still trying. Do you mind sticking around afterwards if you got the rules on that? I can't get them straight. I'm reading blogs right now. You know how one blog says one thing, then another one says another thing? So, at any rate, what are RRM's objectives? RRM's objectives are to measure over the air, measure our own interference, measure rogue interference, determine channels, power, and the things you need to run a network cleanly. What it doesn't do, it won't fix, it may mask a poor installation. It won't fix things that you didn't discover in a site survey. If you didn't do a site survey, it's not going to fix your neighbor's Wi-Fi intruding with you. It will to a point, but we've only got so much spectrum. And it won't make new spectrum. The RF group is central to this, okay? And this used to be a bigger problem and more of a challenge because we had the old 4100 controllers that had 100 APs on it, right? Now that we're up to these 6,000 AP monsters, it's rare that you have to put too many controllers together and put them underneath of one RF control domain. But the RF group is still actually pretty important, so I've seen a couple of sins created with that, and it has caused much sadness. So the RF group, and that data includes measurements for noise, and it's system-wide. That's one of the advantages of our WLC, and I love it, is I know how every AP hears every other AP in the installation because we're collecting those neighbor messages in a centralized fashion. So we collect the noise, interference, signal, which is RAPs. Interference in RRM terms means not RAPs. Interference and non-Wi-Fi interference are two different things. And the load. We don't use the load much. The load is pretty dynamic. I don't know if you've ever watched channel utilization in your office, but it can bounce up and down incredibly. All of our RRM's decisions are based on neighbor data. So we make a lot of decisions. You guys have seen DBS, a dynamic bandwidth selection. Everything that happens in RRM starts with one packet being sent across the air, heard by another AP. And in that way, we build a map of the RF distances and understand where our cell edges are. But every decision after that is made on that measurement. What do you think happens if that measurement's wrong? Well, you're right. Every other decision after that is wrong. So we had some recent trouble with that. That's completely out of the code now. But if you saw some things that were wonky, it was probably due to that back in early 8.0, 8.3 code. And now it's stable again. I'm running this entire venue on RRM right now. And it does a pretty good job, even in the face of like the World of Solutions, where we've got a lot of Wi-Fi that isn't ours. We gather it for every AP. It gives us context. It lets us understand the RF environment. Location, 802.11k, V, When we pass a neighbor list, where do you think we get that data? So the RF group forms the construct of this. This defines the boundary of what is our network, what isn't our network, and where our network is. RF grouping, if over-the-air messages are being heard above -75 or at -75 or above, we include you as a neighbor. If it drops below -75, then you are not my neighbor. And we've got about a 5 dB hysteresis in there. So you got to drop down below -75 by 5 dB, then we'll drop you, and then we'll allow you back in if you come up above that. So neighbors on the edge, and this shows how dated this is. We're actually looking at updating that quite a bit. But -75 for an edge of a network, you guys are probably designing to what, -65 at a minimum? -67 assumes a -90 noise floor, and you might have a fluctuation by up to about -85. In here, when they've got a big conference going on, I've seen -65 as a noise floor. Yeah, it's pretty ugly. So the neighboring is built and contained underneath of the RF group. If you are not my neighbor, but you are a neighbor of a neighbor, you will still be part of my RF group, right? If there are no neighbors around you, you will share the same RF group name on another controller. But let's say one controller's in Spain and the other one's in London. You'll not have neighbors between those two controllers. At that point, the RF group and that RF grouping name is a name. It's a name that we give the construct of the RF group, but it's purely logical. It has nothing to do with over the air, except that that name and a hash are put into the neighbor message. So you can see two controllers that are not neighbors, but have the same RF group name. And the way this breaks down is every isolated group of APs, even within the building, is its own RF group, according to RM. Because we group everything by groups of APs that need to have channel and power configured together because they are in proximity of each other. So if you have multiple controllers, they may not be the same RF group. And if you have multiple RF group leaders, which is always a single controller, you have an RF group leader for each band. And that doesn't necessarily need to be on the same controller. So over the years, this is encrypted. The RF group leader will have, and that's global level settings, it's going to handle the allowed channels, channel bandwidth that you're selecting, TPC values, DCA channels, coverage hole detection and mitigation. That's all at the global level in the RF group. The ones that are controlled at the local controller are data rates, coverage hole detection and mitigation, thresholds are determined there, and TPC min and max will operate strictly on the local controller, and then RF profiles. RF profiles are always what overrides everything. So if you were to look at the debugs for RM when it does its calculation, first thing it does is consult the local groups. So it'll break everything up by the AP grouping, the RF profile. If there's no RF profile, it will then use the global level. Grouping is done automatically, which is a lot of people aren't aware of this, mostly because it just works. Has anybody seriously looked at RF grouping other than giving it a name before? That's really good. It means it's working great. Auto grouping happens, believe it or not, by the Aloha protocol or a derivative of that. We send a broadcast on the local link. The one trick to auto grouping, if you really look at this now, and you see two controllers that are plugged into the same distribution system and they are not a group leader and a group member, if you don't have any APs on one of those controllers, auto will not form. It needs two things. It needs to see the broadcast on the distribution system. It needs to see neighbor messages over the air. Then they will group. There's no reason for the two controllers to group if the APs that they control are not in proximity. This surprises people when they have a problem that results from no RF grouping, or you make changes on your RF group leader and the other controller's APs in another building don't do the same thing. because the RF group leader's configuration is what controls those APs. So it is important. You also have the selection to do a static group leader. A static group leader simply sets that controller as leader. The advantage to static group leader is you can isolate a controller. In fact, we do it in here a lot. I'll make a controller static because that network is in close proximity to another network, but I don't want to change every AP in here while I'm tuning the keynote. So the keynote runs on its own controller. We isolate it in an RF group just so that I don't make changes to the rest of the venue. So it's actually a useful feature to isolate. If it's isolated in the middle and you're expecting to make changes from one and have all of them do it, that can be a problem. This is a choice though, because auto is the default. So it bears mentioning, because I've had a few people get surprised lately because they're not aware of how that works or the function of it. So I thought I would cover it here. The other major difference is RRM used to operate based on the license count of the controller. In fact, up through version 7, if you had a 500 license count on the controller, then it assumed you had 500 APs. And there are limits to the number of APs that you can have under the same RF group. Those limits have increased, but they're still very real. About version 7.2, when we started introducing RF profiles, they changed that to only counting actual connected APs. So now, if you have an AP group's potential of 1,000 APs, you only have 500 APs, it shows 500 APs in the AP group, where if you had two controllers with 500 licenses, regardless of how many APs you had before, you have 1,000 APs. This can still be a problem if you're grouping controllers together, because a couple of things happen here. It used to be no problem if an RF group split off. You probably wouldn't even be aware of it unless you went looking at it, right? That was the old days. These days, we've got 802.11k, we've got V. These things rely on neighbors. The other thing is if you do split the group and you go with a dedicated static leader, it counts the license count of the APs. So be aware of that. We had a situation that happened at a university, and we got the following screen up there, that he had 2,000 for a maximum of 3,500 APs. All he'd done is taken his 4 WISMs and converted them over to static to help FRA get a better resolution. FRA also needs to work in the same RF group, and if you still have multiple controllers, just double check that 802.11a and 802.11b group leaders are on the same controller. FRA needs both of those informations, and it's only going to work on one controller. So if your controllers have split it, and this is primarily in WISMs, I think pretty much 5500s and up, you might see it in a 5500. Once you get into the 75s and the 85s and on up from there, you probably won't ever have to worry about this. Just know that it's there. There we go. The hierarchy is listed above. This is also in the RRM white paper. It used to be that the controller with the lowest error count simply and the highest MAC address would become the group leader. As controllers got bigger, it made more and more sense to put in a mechanism to say, you know what, the 8540 should probably be the boss of all the 3504s out there. So there is a hierarchy. You can't force, even in static mode where you can add secondaries and develop it, you can't force a lower capable controller to be the boss of higher capable controllers. So if you ever do this and you're going to put it in there, like me, I'll even do it today. I do it in my lab all the time, and I'm like, God, why won't that group? And it's like, oh yeah, there's a hierarchy. Go back, flip it around, and make it go. But it can cost you some time. We used to say, like I said, it didn't matter. If you exceed the RF group size, RRM will just split into another group. It'll take a capable controller, and it will make it the new group leader because it has no more room in the other group. That used to not matter. People used to worry. What if this side of the room is in one RF group and this side of the room is in the other RF group? Theoretically, it's possible. Never saw it happen in the wild. Looked at it for a lot of years. Didn't matter. Certainly does now. How many of you are using Fastlane or turning on 802.11k and V? Okay, this becomes relevant and important again because if you have an RF group split, then you're no longer neighbors with that AP that's sitting next to you. Now this works out fine in RRM because we calculate rogue info. We're still looking for open channels and it will balance out. The downside is if your roaming path is between the two of those, your 802.11k and V neighbor messages are not going to reflect that because that group on the right is one group and the group on the left is another group, and those APs do not know each other as neighbors. In fact, they used to show up as rogues until we invented the mobility group, and the mobility group is what keeps and suppresses rogue messages from your own APs. So just be aware of that. How many of you are going to go back now and take a look at RF grouping? Good. It's better to look at something before it's on fire. You know, have you ever taken something apart and gone, boy, I wish I had a picture of one of these that worked? C9800 went through great pains to get IRCM, which is the inter-release, God, what does CM stand for? Basically backward compatibility. And I was very, very dubious. I got involved in this probably back last April. And I am extremely skeptical when it comes to operational environments. But you can group. There is a different config model for the C9800. Give it a chance. It makes a lot more sense. It kind of ticked me off because I had to read a book first. But get a presentation here. I'll give you some numbers. There's good presentations going on this week, and do get by the World Solutions and talk to them because the solutions are getting much more flexible. You can go into the cloud now. You can spin up controllers just by pushing a button. You can implement a network in the cloud. It takes about 40 seconds. We had a couple of partners race each other at the last partner event that we did. And they won a t-shirt, but there was only a 5-second difference. And honestly, I think Frank was feeling the night before. I was out with him. So you can pick up the AP groups, you can pick up all the APs, the RF profiles, and you can match them, and a C9800 can be the group leader, and FRA will expand and work across the entire domain. The only trick to that is that you're going to need a consistency, which means that your site profile, is it the site, and the RF profile need to have the same name as the AP groups on the other side. So when you pick up a C9800 or the software for it to implement and test, just keep that in mind. And there's good detail on all of the implementation documentation that we have now. So in a mixed controller environment, you need to be aware of that in a individual environment, and keep in mind, if you're spinning these up on the cloud or you're putting them out in the field, as long as those two networks can't hear each other, it's no problem to have its own RF group leader. You'll be able to manage it from DNA. Excuse me, Cisco DNA Center. Yeah, policy tag and the RF tag that needs to be the same. I thought I might have gotten that wrong. Once you match those up, everything works. Any questions on C9800? Nope, okay. Neighbor discovery, remember that measurement we talked about? Is anybody having any problems with RRM in their environment right now, or see some weird stuff going on? Stick around. I might answer some of it. One of the things that's crucial is neighbor discovery. Now, neighbor discovery is a packet, and we send one. We send one on every channel, and it gets knocked out of the air if your network's busy, right? Or it can be misinterpreted, but collisions is the #1 thing that normally happens. And I send one of those every 3 minutes to every channel. So we scan, and when we're off channel, we send and listen. And in this way, we get enough neighbor packets in. Something that's important to that is in 8.0, they changed the default pruning timer. It had always been 1 hour. And the only downside to that 1 hour was if you deleted an AP in Prime, Prime displayed that AP in its RF for a full hour until it timed out of that neighbor list. Well, somebody thought that was a bug, so they fixed it and they unilaterally changed the default to 15 minutes. So keeping in mind that I'm building a picture of the RF and who can hear each other, and I've got this one packet that goes every 3 minutes from every AP, and that's on non-DFS channels. On the DFS channels, the rules are, if I go off channel passively, of course, if I'm going to transmit there, I've got to clear that channel, right? I got to be a master to broadcast in a potentially radar collision environment. So to get around that and still send NDP packets, if I hear a beacon from one of my own APs, which is a master, I can call that channel cleared. If I hear probe response or a probe going to, it's a directed probe going to an AP, I can also call that clear. So there's a lot of things that conspire against that one packet getting in, and to manage that, you need a buffer, right? Turns out 15 minutes was a little short. I didn't even get asked about that decision, and I know those engineers, we send each other cards around the holidays. Nobody mentioned it. I got to Berlin, the last year we were in Berlin, we set the network up with 8.0 code, and in the morning I had 3,000 channel changes on 700 APs in about 7 hours, which concerned me deeply. Come to find out at 15 minutes, what I looked at, DCA is who's going to use those neighbors, right? It's going to pick channels based on that. And if you looked at the DCA runs every 10 minutes, about every 10 minutes, my neighbor list was different. First time, I'd have this AP. The next time, he didn't get in that time, so I'd drop him, add another one that I'd get in. And if the neighbor list keeps changing, then the channel plan has to keep changing, and hence and so forth. So if you're seeing a lot of channel changes, probably want to go back and take a look at this setting. What is an NDP? Well, next setting. NDP packet contains facts. It tells my other APs things like who my RF group is, right? So I'm your neighbor or I'm not your neighbor. We also use it for rogue detection. Okay, if I see an AP's BSS ID and I don't see a neighbor packet coming out of him, he can't be a Cisco AP, therefore he can't be mine, right? He's definitely not in my group. So a lot of information is passed. It is heard and logged by every AP, and if it's not of my AP group or of my network, it's written down as a rogue, so we get a lot of information from this. When they messed with the NDP retention in 8.0, they made it unilateral and didn't give me a knob for it, so I couldn't fix what was going on in Berlin. I ended up static planning 700 APs, and I did a pretty good job of it too. 8.0 and later, the default was still 15 minutes, but you could actually manipulate that value, and that's what changed. So if you've never touched this, know that, and in fact, I think the latest code that's shipping right now, it is. We put the default back to 1 hour. Initially, it was thought that this wasn't a problem anywhere but in high-density environments, such as a conference center. And then we started to have carpeted office space show some scenes and signs. And so they finally did put the default back to 1 hour. It took a little while, but they did. The way this works now, channel scan interval, neighbor packet frequency, that should never go below 180. And then the neighbor timeout factor. Your hang time is a multiplier of that 5 and that 180. So 5 times 180 gives you what, 900? And that's 15 minutes, 900 seconds. You want that to be 20. If it's not 20 on your controller, put it up to 20. It won't interrupt anything. It'll just start keeping your neighbor discovery longer. And you will probably have better results at least somewhere in your environment. C9800 in the 16.10 version, not too many of you are running it, but just be aware it's still got the old method and the old screen. 16.11, they're fixing it. Radio resource management RRM RF grouping is contained in the RRM white paper. That's a link to it right there. That's a deep dive on RF grouping. It's only updated to 8.3 right now. Not a lot has changed. I'm going to do another update for 8.8, so that's this year's task. Okay, how many of you have run FRA? Any positive opinions? That includes positively don't like it, positively do like it. All right, flexible radio architecture. Any of you wonder how it works or are getting ready to deploy it? Good, so this is a timely conversation. Anybody completely bored by this subject? Stick around, I have some more. All right, so FRA, its only job in life, because how many of you are shutting off 2.4 gigahertz interfaces today to get that balanced and working because you're primarily deploying for 5 gigahertz? Okay. Well, 2.4 gigahertz propagates roughly 1.5 times further. You have less channels. If every AP has a 2.4 gigahertz interface, it's very easy to rapidly get to a point where you saturate the spectrum. Anybody ever overcook 2.4 gigahertz? Set your data rates down to about 1 megabit per second, and you let every AP with, say, 3,000 or 2,500 square foot cells broadcast, put about 6 SSIDs on that 2.4 gigahertz, and you can fill the air with nothing but your own management traffic. There won't be a client get on it. So it's important, and for the longest time, we didn't have any answers for that, but that's why the 2800, the 3800, 48 has that XOR radio on the primary radio, lets you change the role, because the old answer was shut off the radio, which provides no value. It doesn't do any intelligence. You can't gather any location information. You paid for both radios and you shut one off. So now we thought it'd be great if we had an algorithm, because anybody who's gone through, anybody in here gone through the exercise of identifying and shutting off the right 2.4 gigahertz radios so that you do, it's kind of painful, isn't it? Yeah. And it doesn't stay that way forever if somebody else gets in behind you. FRA's job is to listen to all of 2.4, and it only operates in 2.4. And it hears all those neighbor messages, and its job is to determine whether or not you can cover this radio with other 2.4 in the air, or you can't. If you can, we mark the radio as redundant. Once the radio is redundant, we can use that XOR radio for anything we want. We can monitor both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, all the channels, or we can flip it to 5 gigahertz and provide double the capacity. So that's where I get back to the argument. If you're doing 80 megahertz channels, you got 2 5 gigahertz radios, you just burned 8 channels in one placement. So be careful with that. But then, if it's a redundant radio, we pass it to DCA. So FRA's got a very, very limited scope. It listens to all the neighbor messages. It builds a picture in its head of the environment, right? We take into account all the power levels. The next thing that we do is we plot circles around these things. Now, these are imaginary circles. They're done in math. It's not done on a map. But you can roughly estimate how far your cell reaches based on the power level and how well I'm hearing that at known distances to other APs. So we do a pretty good job of matching it. Once we do that, we do a multi-point measurement of all the intersections. The only product of FRA is coverage overlap factor. And that coverage overlap factor tells you what percentage of the cell you're looking at is covered by other APs. So if I get a match, the default is 100%. If I get a good match, then that radio is redundant. I don't need that radio because that cell's covered by one or more other APs. And what do you think first thing I did when I got this? I put 2 APs right next to each other. I fired them up, and I didn't get 100%. Now, how can that be? Called the engineers. Frankly, they hadn't considered that use case. It was a bug. Coverage overlap factor is going to give you the percentage of cells coverage The rules on that is if I make a radio redundant, any of those contributing cells can't be called redundant anymore because I used it. There is one way back to 2.4 once you've been marked redundant. If any one of those contributing cells comes up with a coverage hole alert, it will immediately revert your AP back to 2.4. So we thought about that too. If I'm relying on those three to do it and I'm wrong, we probably better bring it back. Coverage overlap factor can be looked at in monitor, monitor radios, dual band radios. And the interesting thing about this, and what I've used before, you can also see it in the show advanced FRA output. In 8.8, we started shipping the code with FRA turned on by default. Be aware of that. That will not affect an upgrade. If you have an upgrade and FRA at the global level is turned off, it will be turned off after your upgrade. But if you build a new controller, and I've had some customers do this in some fairly large campuses, all their APs started to change bands magically. It can be very concerning. One of the things I'm going to tell you to do, the radios are always going to be in audit. So at the global level, you can enable or disable the algorithm. At the radio level, you can say participate or don't participate. By default, they're all auto. If they're in auto and FRA is turned on, it will calculate the FRA, and if it thinks that radio belongs somewhere else, it will shift it. Personally, I believe heavily in Murphy's Law. I get into environments where we are operational. I hate when things start happening that I didn't tell it to do. It just makes me nervous. It looks like a long weekend, right? And I'm not real quick to trust algorithms. Don't know why. 35 years in computers, I've never seen anything work unexpectedly. You can put this in manual, turn FRA on, and you can still calculate your coverage overlap factor. And if you haven't deployed FRA, I highly recommend you do this because you're going to learn a lot about your environment. One, two, you can give it a sniff check and then things won't be a surprise. And if you don't like any of the conclusions, just don't put that radio in auto and no changes will happen. So it's really useful for evaluating the coverage. It's really useful for taking a look at where to set your defaults. You can set still custom channel, custom power. RRM's completely separate from this. You cannot set on a dual 5 gigahertz radio, you can't set those radios any closer than 100 megahertz. Reason for that is I've got two radios in the same cover. Now both those radios are going out separate antennas if they're in the same band. One's horizontal, the other one's vertical. We started with isolation at the chipset level. I think we got 13 dB isolation between the radios built into the chip. And then the vertical and the horizontal, and then you've got frequency diversity. That frequency diversity is important. We start to see, I'll see 98% efficiency, meaning the max that 2.5 gigahertz interfaces together should be able to carry. I'll get 98% of that if I'm over 120 megahertz apart. The closer I get to 100 megahertz, starts to degrade down to 95%. Everybody says, well, 5%. 95% of 2.5 gigahertz channel is a lot better than using 100% of one. It's a lot more bandwidth, so that's pretty good. But the system won't let you do that. The other thing that can happen, and I'm going to mention it again, 80 megahertz channels. I have customers now who hate 2.4 gigahertz. Who here has sworn to never deploy 2.4 gigahertz again? Anybody? Who's gotten away with doing that in their environment? It's happening more and more in carpeted office space. And I hear guys all the time that now have a problem or RRM's broken because they see channel 36 and 20 megahertz when they configured 40 megahertz and he's got a bunch of channel 36s. Well, we turn on dual 5 gigahertz manually, meaning we lock out FRA, everything's manual, and then you make 80 megahertz channels and burn 8 at a time. In Europe, you'd hit that pretty quick. In the US, they burn up 25 channels like that. Newer DCA in 8.7 and above used to configure the best channel it could. Now, if the infrastructure was crap, you got the most optimized crap you could get. It would still give it a channel. It would say, well, it's better than the other choices, and the other choices were bad too, right? Now, it will actually not assign the channel if it's going to be destructive to the other channels, and it'll leave it at the default value of 36 and 20. So that's a flag that you have oversaturated or overused the channels. 9 times out of 10, if I drop it back to 40 megahertz, things get better. And then if you go through and run FRA, you find out you had a bunch of radios that probably shouldn't have had a channel to begin with. So I highly recommend not manually putting everything in dual 5 gigahertz and going down that road. At least run FRA and let it get its opinion. When you configure FRA, service assurance is still there, but that's not valid anymore. You're going to get a choice. Either coverage, which is the default profile for what I just discussed, or client aware. Client aware lets you take a monitor roll radio, and I've got some more on this later, but it lets you bring a 5 gigahertz interface online for a flash mob. Anybody here stay awake at night worrying about where they're going to have their next big event? Hear that all the time too on a Friday night. They decided to put 300 people in my lobby with cheese and wine. And that was the same place they said, well, we only need 1 AP, so you don't have to be involved in that. And then the thing fails, and it's all C-level executives, and they get mad. This will actually prevent that. It'll give you more capacity if your capacity goes up. We'll talk about that more. The other things you can do is 1 to 24-hour interval. 1 hour is plenty. In fact, I generally will run FRA and then only run it again after things have changed, if I add more APs or subtract APs. Low, medium, and high sensitivities. This refers directly to coverage overlap. Default is 100%, medium is 95, and low is 90. So what that says is the coverage overlap needs to be at least that much or it won't. It'll call it redundant, but it won't move on it. It won't act on it. So it's extremely conservative. I think most people are running it in high sensitivity. And there's a couple of use cases that are important around that. We'll talk about those quickly. FRA manual versus auto, and FRA on and off. So there's the global level, then there's the radio level. Again, if FRA is enabled at the global level, but it's manual at the AP level and you haven't enabled it, you can generate coverage overlap factor, get all the algorithm metrics, and you won't change a single thing. If those are in auto, as soon as it detects it, DCA runs it, it'll change it. The client aware piece is really a nice feature. Let's say, and how many of you heard when the 3800 came out that says just brings bandwidth online instantly if needed, it'll take it back from 2.4. There's a little bit of marketing around that. And those of us who had our hands on it were like, really? It took a little while to get that feature implemented, but it's in there now and it's on the FRA console. If you have too many 5 gigahertz interfaces, the 5 gigahertz interface or that XOR radio is going to get put in the monitor roll. In monitor roll, it's useful for location resolution, rogue detection, WIDS, whips. So there's a lot of function there. But what if you overblow your cell? What if you have a conference room that's supposed to seat 25 people and they bring 50 in extra and everybody's all on video feeds talking to each other? You'll run out of capacity. So if that happens, your capacity changes, I can take that monitor roll AP based on the channel utilization or the actual air utilization, I can bring another 5 gigahertz interface on. Well, how do I do that? When DCA does the calculation, it comes up with a score, right? That score above or below a threshold on that score says I can or can't add a channel here. And then we'll pick the channel. Most cases where I can't, we're not that far below that threshold. And the logic is, I can go ahead and assign a channel on this. RRM will see where the interference is and work that out on the next round, right? So while it's suboptimal, if I've got 100 people suddenly underneath a 1 AP, it's probably better if I give them bandwidth and interfere slightly with something where they're not. and pull that in. And then it'll do the reverse once that duty cycle drops. So the way this works, the channel utilization or the duty cycle of the RF, you set the threshold for the up, and then the reverse of that is both thresholds for both radios. And we're looking for a percentage to drop back from that threshold. So we go back below the one radio's current channel utilization sufficiently. We go up to a stop. We trigger and pull the other 5 gigahertz radio on based on one radio's utilization, because it's the only one that's active. Once both are active, we're looking for a percentage of reduction in both radios' utilization to revert it back to a monitor roll. And at that point, everything goes back to reset. So that's a nice feature for surprises. One downside to it is I can't plan where that is right now. So FRA will automatically determine which radio is going to be a monitor roll, and that sometimes is not fully optimal. So we're working on implementing something that gives you a little more determinism. Once everything goes back, you're back to the normal network and FRA's calculation, and life is happy. Another thing you want to, anybody got a question on that? Yes. Okay, so in 8.5, you're saying we don't have these other selections? I thought it was there. Let's double check that, because I'm pretty sure I pulled that from 8.5. 8.4 is where we got some of this and some fixes, but is anybody here running 8.4? Good, because friends don't let friends drive 8.4. It had a little special hair on it. We weren't really fixing that too much. 8.5 is where you should be. Honestly, if you're on anything besides 8.5, and the reason is anything other than you have APs that aren't supported in 8.5, you should really be looking at 8.5 MR4. And if you're tired of 8.5 and you want to go somewhere, 8.8 MR2 is looking really good too. Had really good results with that. How many here are on 8.0 or 8.3? I know, you get a little gun shy for updating, aren't you? I think that's over now. 8.5 also fixed and 8.4 fixed. It used to be if a monitor roll radio was assigned, it was a monitor roll radio for life. Now that becomes a problem. What if you had DBS selected and you didn't go to the command line and limit that to 40 megahertz? And you had 80 megahertz channels popping up here or popping up there? Well, it makes sense that eventually DCA is going to get to a point, because he had 80 megahertz on this side, then 80 megahertz on that side. FRA may run and say, you don't have any place to put a 5 gigahertz channel, right? And then those other radios go back to 40 megahertz or 20 megahertz, whatever's needed at that point in time. And what we saw, and it usually started with 80 megahertz FRA, what we saw was this one got turned into a monitor, this one got turned into a monitor, and you look around and pretty much all the ones that were redundant were going to monitor roll and staying there. Well, the only way back to 2.4 gigahertz at that point in time was if you had a coverage hole. And FRA only runs at 2.4 gigahertz, so once you got the monitor roll, that was for life. In 8.5, we put a little logic in that said, if you've been a monitor roll radio for 30 minutes, raise your hand and DCA will take a look at your situation and see if it improved. So if you're running FRA on anything below 8.5, keep an eyeball out for that condition. It's fixed. The answer, of course, is you can revert your monitor roll radios back and just run FRA again if you need to recover it. If it's happening a lot, then DBS is set too high, you don't have enough channels, go to the command line. There is a max bandwidth command for DBS that tells it what the limit is for assignment. All right, where am I at? Good. Any questions on RRM, FRA? Yes, sir.
It's more of maybe a feature
Not yet. I know. Yeah, no, that's it. The question was, is there a way to lock FRA out so it only makes monitor mode APs? And I've got a little more control over, I'm big on determinism. I do things on purpose. So if there's a reason that something's doing something auto, you had better give me a knob or a button to make it not do that if I decide that my environment doesn't match your expectations. On the other hand, we're invested right now in making everything easier, so knobs only come after I have a problem and can get those implemented. That is being looked at on the C9800s. I would like to be able to grade that as well and decide where to put a monitor, where to put a client aware AP, which is exactly why I want to do it, because in all my conference rooms, I want a single 5 gigahertz and make them all capable of bursting. Precisely, yeah. The other issue is location. You can, from the revert command at the command line, set all of them to 2.4 or all of them to 5 gigahertz, but you can't at this point set them all to monitor roll. Precisely, yep. That'll come, just not yet. So, okay, determinism. Let's jump into 802.11ax. Has anybody here been looking at this standard? How many of you have been sitting back going, yeah, bigger, faster, wider, right? I mean, it's like we've been on this mantra, right? We had 11N and then 11AC, and then wave 2 of 11AC was going to get much bigger, right? And we were going to have multi-user MIMO. Everybody remember how quiet that got after we got out there with wave 2? Everybody's. Turns out it didn't work as good as everybody had hoped. And now we've got 802.11ax. How many of you cynical people think we keep making this stuff up so we can sell you new radios? My brain goes to dark places sometimes too, but that's not why we're doing that. There are obviously problems in Wi-Fi. How many questions do you get to answer with "that depends"? I'll even give you a benefit. If we're sitting in a sales meeting and you say, well, what's the value for this? I'll ask you, do you want a marketing answer or do you want an engineering answer? Marketing, please, 5. Engineering, it depends. Okay, so 802.11ax, when I first took a look at this, I got to tell you honestly, I got really excited because it's like somebody sat down and said, what are all the problems that Wi-Fi doesn't solve? Well, how about if we make that the target, huh? And there are still problems in Wi-Fi. We've gotten a lot more capacity. I mean, how many people today are worried, literally, that you're going to go over capacity or have a Wi-Fi problem that isn't directly related to something else breaking? Still happens, but it doesn't happen with near the frequency it did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you decided you wanted to be a wireless engineer, your better half might suggest you get help. It was not friendly in that environment. So what have we done? The problem in Wi-Fi, again, is that depends. What have we done? Well, I remember a while ago we talked about making Wi-Fi deterministic. At that point in time, up in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley, Wi-Fi is this beautiful thing, man. It's chaos. You can't make it deterministic because it just keeps working. But we knew that if you kept adding clients, it quit working. We also knew at that point in time, because we modeled it, if we just got control of the client's transmit power and we added a little bit of determinism to it, we could increase the cell capacity by 35 or 40%, depending on how we tweaked it. But it was an unpopular idea to make Wi-Fi take turns. So, didn't happen. Since then, we've worked on airtime efficiency. We worked on airtime efficiency by making better and better drag racers, okay? 4 things affect that: the data rate, number of spatial streams, channel bandwidth. We get a wider channel, we can spit more bits, right? And protocol overhead. Well, the protocol overhead's kind of been going up anyway because we got the HT header, the VHT header. We keep adding stuff onto the standard, right? Meanwhile, back in 802.11a land, all of our management traffic is still 802.11a. Things have gotten faster, right? But now we get these slides with 802.11ax, and these look just like marketing slides for every other protocol, don't they? What, 4 times the performance, cellular-like reliability, IoT advantages, battery savings, blah, blah. Looks the same as when we talked about 802.11ac and 802.11n. What I want to talk about is why those marketing slides say that and why I think that is absolutely the truth. We're doing simulations now. So how many of you have heard about or read through OFDMA? How many of you have looked at one of those white papers and gone, what? Okay, I did. I was like, boy, that sounds really smart. It's got to be right. I don't know why, though. We're promising multi-gigabit capacity, higher density, less interference, more determinism, better battery life. That's a whole host of problems to fixing what's wrong with Wi-Fi. OFDMA is the big star here. That depends as a target. So far, we've talked data rates, right? We keep getting faster data rates. AC brought us 256 QAM, and immediately the naysayers were like, yes, but you got to be 3 feet from the AP to get 256 QAM. So just put your guy on a desk, on a ladder, holding the laptop there. Well, we actually got more coverage than that with it, right? Data rates are density, information density. Has anybody ever seen the constellation? That's what we see as I and Q. And I and Q are the symbols that are broadcast by the radio that we turn into dots. Well, what's gotten better is our ability to filter and our ability to make better RF, because RF is not pretty. When you spark an RF piece of energy out there, if you look at it close enough, it's got hair all over it, right? But the transmitters have gotten better. Our filter abilities in DSP have gotten better. And we can make charts that keep getting denser and denser. So that's where we keep getting better data rates from, right? Still requires the same amount of SNR, but if we're sending better stuff in, we're getting better stuff out. And here, we're going to get to go to 1024 up from 256 QAM. So that's a bunch more data in there. But the radios are capable of doing it now. I've got a slide later on that shows what the predictive coverage is, because this still relies on signal-to-noise ratio. And I think it's right around 35 or 40 dB of signal-to-noise ratio you need for 1024. But it gets further than you'd think. Spatial streams. We're going from 4 to 8 spatial streams. Does anybody remember 802.11n was supposed to have 8 spatial streams or capable of it? Turned out in 802.11n, those other 4 spatial streams made such a minimal difference at such a high cost, it just wasn't worth going there. 802.11ac, kind of the same thing going to 8 spatial streams in AC. The one good argument for that was multi-user MIMO. And we have problems on the client side with multi-user MIMO, so that's no good for 802.11ac. 802.11ax, seems they've worked out all those problems. We have a new radio, we have a new protocol, so 8 spatial streams is a reality. And spatial streams has been kind of a boom, because if we don't need to use those spatial streams all for data, we can actually use 2 of them to reinforce client link or beamforming, right? We can increase the amount of energy going to a specific client and improve its SNR. So there's all kinds of good uses for spatial streams. In your environments, how many of you run a drag strip? Your normal daily operations is one client being maximum fast as it can be. It's not. We don't run drag strips. We run city buses. You need a bus coming by regularly to move a lot of data, right? And as long as everybody's getting their screen back fast enough, you're doing your job. Channel bonding, the next way we increase capacity. But we don't have an infinite number of channels. So we've gone from 20 to 40 to 80 to 160. How many of you deal with marketing in your environment? They tend to want to take volumes of information, and the challenge for a technical person is always to get this down to the 3 bullet points they can hang on to, right? And when 160 megahertz channels came out, I watched all of marketing go, it's 160 megahertz. I said, yeah, but I can't run a network on one channel. Can't do it. We know it'll interfere, right? So channel bonding has a limitation in the amount of spectrum that we have available. And that spectrum is very precious to us. I mentioned already that we've got LTE moving in there. So we got to be concerned about how we use it. Again, if you don't think spectrum is important, wait till you run out. Anybody ever run out of spectrum? Does that happen at a convenient time? No. And it ends things. So why should you think about 802.11ax? How many of you know we're not even getting a client until like March? And that's the target date, right? Why think about it now? Well, we didn't have any AC clients when we started deploying AC. And what I saw was with a better radio, keep in mind that speed graph, and we talked about how much better resolution radios are, and the radios keep getting better, right? So immediately, what I have seen, and maybe you guys have seen this too, we put in 802.11n, we didn't have any end clients. We saw better performance from all the legacy clients. We put in 802.11ac, we saw better performance for the legacy clients. And it wasn't really tangible. It wasn't something you could measure on a speed test, but it was more something that the flaky edges of my cell and those little troubling issues that come up, like I couldn't get coverage here and then it got better, right? Those types of little things go away. The other thing that we saw was as the clients came on, we got much better airtime performance, and it happened pretty quickly, right? So this is 3 years data from Mobile World Congress, actually, right? Back in 2015, we had 35% AC clients. We had a total of 17.5 terabytes. And the average channel utilization in this hall was 60 to 65%. But look at that across the bottom. The airtime utilization has stayed the same, right? And as of 2017, I had almost 30 terabytes of data passing in the same amount of airtime. We didn't add APs. We just got more AC clients, right? And I can tell you in here, next month, anybody ever been here for Mobile World Congress? 150,000 of our closest friends are going to come to Barcelona, and it is not the experience you just had after that. And 100,000 of them come here. So we need every bit of bandwidth we can get because they all expect wireless to work. So that in itself kept the APs in the ceiling, and pretty much the same ones in the same places. We're starting to harden up over some of the booths now because people just keep wanting more bandwidth, right? Anybody here ever seen their network requirements shrink? You know, without selling the company or cutting a campus in half or something like that. Anybody ever seen the requirement go down? Nope. All right. So there are benefits to being an early adopter. Not too early in my opinion, but an early adopter. It's worth looking at right now. The other thing that I will tell you is that depends, is most prevalent. How many of you are doing real-time traffic, voice, video, conferencing, right? Okay, well, how many concurrent voice real-time videos can you say? Don't give me a marketing answer. Give me the that depends answer, right? And it does depend. But the general rule of thumb right now, 20 to 30 peak, and that's concurrent calls. That doesn't mean 20 to 30 users. That means 20 concurrent users, and you'll pretty much eat the bandwidth up. That hasn't changed since 11n. It's the same. And this can be done with data? Sure it can. Marketing answer. How many data clients and how many voice clients can I put on at the same time? Do you have a good answer for that? That depends. I mean, you know, how much data are the data clients going to use? Because we've got a finite amount of bandwidth. And what's really the problem here is latency. Latency kills us. And why is it still that depends? OFDM is why it's still that depends. In OFDM, I mean, we made fantastic strides. We got better data rates, we got wider channels, we got good spatial streams. How many of you have been doing wireless for at least 10 years? You've seen the improvement. Undoubtedly, I spend more time with my family now than I did 10 years ago. I think people understand it better, but OFDM, for all of its advantages, one client's data is one packet across the air. And my protocol overhead can't be touched that way. So if I've got 20 clients lined up, I have the round time to get enough packets out there and give you another chance to transmit to keep your two-way conversation from going one way. 30 clients, 40 clients, now everyone's got to be cycled through, and if I've got QoS configured, everything's an important packet because they're all voice packets, you're going to run out of bandwidth, right? You're going to run out of latency and time. Yep, I got 2 of those slides in there. Don't worry, we covered it. So we haven't done anything about the protocol overhead, right? OFDMA is a game changer. My marketing guys, because I'm a technical marketing engineer, but I'm more T than M, my marketing guys keep saying, if you had to sum up what's important about 802.11ax or Wi-Fi 6, what's important? I'm like, OFDMA, man, it's a game changer. Everything changes with OFDMA. And this is important because your life's going to get better. Taking a look at the data that goes over the air, how many of you do packet captures or have that automated, right? What's the average size packet on your network? Teeny. Okay, so I'm burping a radio every time one of these teeny packets comes across the air. Drives up my duty cycle, drives up my airtime utilization. 87%, and this is well below, what, 320 bytes of data. Those are teeny packets. So OFDM, every packet that goes has got to have framing around it. What happens? Well, just like going home at rush hour. I got $10 worth of traffic on a $5 highway. We're all going to sit here for a while, right? Back up. OFDMA changes. I get the use of subcarriers. Now, with a single packet header, I've got subcarriers or sub-channels within that structure, and OFDMA gives me the mechanism to modulate each one of those differently with different data. I can mix, I can match, I can put more than one user in one frame. Now my bus comes by every 5 minutes and it doesn't just have one person on it. I can take the entire bus stop and bring another one in. So what do you think that does for latency, determinism? Everything gets better. We did some simulations because we don't have a lot of data yet. We've got radios. We are doing better work in the labs right now, but the protocols are still being worked out. This is brand new. If you take a look on this, Wi-Fi 6 versus Wi-Fi 5, and I wasn't surprised because in our simulations, we simulated video, voice, and data all at the same time. We did it with 802.11n and AC. I just stuck with the AC on this to keep it simple because this used to be a spaghetti chart. Had 90 percentile and 99th percentile and a lot of engineering stuff. But you can see the latency, right? You can see the throughput. Now, you may focus on that part because AC starts out with more throughput. 802.11ax does not. Why? Well, the frames are longer now. We've actually got more resiliency built into this. Frames are longer, the gaps are bigger, and that gives us more reliability because one of the problems we have now is distance. Things break down in OFDM pretty quickly at distance, particularly with a 400 nanosecond versus an 800 nanosecond guard interval. So the guard intervals have been made variable. There's all kinds of things in this to make it solve problems we have in Wi-Fi. Packet loss drops. Notice over here, we're going up to 80 clients. Would you ever put 80 clients, voice clients, dedicated on a single AP? That's why this is important, because it all changes. So how does it do this? Wait, how many times did I put that in there? Nope, jitter and voice, same thing. Or jitter and packet loss, same thing. All right, coverage of 1024 QAM. That's 21 meters across that cell. Now, arguably, that's a model, but that's a pretty good distance to be away from the cell and get 1024, isn't it? It's going to depend on sensitivity of the client. I would expect an iPhone, wonderful Apple product, or a smartphone, period, probably not going to do as well as a laptop at that distance because it doesn't hear as well. But I think we've got some pretty good coverage with it. We're going to be testing it very soon. How does OFDMA work, and what are we actually getting in the first release? If you take a look at the frame structure, it's broken into RUs, which are resource units. So we've got these subcarriers, which are 2 megahertz wide, and we can group these, double them to 52s, 106s, 242s in a 40 megahertz frame. We can get up to 484, right? So this gives us the ability to pick and choose what fits into what and put this together. So obviously a scheduler is going to be really, really important here, okay? And this is the downlink part. So I can put all your data for a bunch of clients that are relatively in the same direction if I want to do beamforming or if I want to use multiple spatial streams. I'm going to put this all together in one packet and I'm going to send it all to you at once. The primary difference is these subcarriers. Again, if I've got 8 users, I've got 8 packets. Under OFDMA, I've got 8 users. I can mix and match those in the same frame. So you see how this becomes more deterministic, how my latency is being kept down because I get many, many more transmit opportunities. And a lot of that traffic is going to fit handily in a lot of these frames. So you're going to see a lot less frames on the air, and the airtime utilization should go down. How many of you? Yes, sir.
Is there airtime fairness in this new
Airtime fairness? Absolutely. Let me tell you something. With this, my QoS profiles get very cellular-like. WFA is discussing things like that right now. Take a look at Vantage 2. WFA's Vantage 2 program details a lot of stuff.
Well, what about the token? Like you say you have the token now and you can talk. So if you have one sending a big packet, say you cannot send a big packet, but a small packet because you have to split it with traffic.
Right, okay, so how does the AP do this? How do we get the determinism? And how do we do airtime fairness? I'm going to cover a lot of the mechanisms in here. We can negotiate that, of course, with the client, right? But it's up to the client on whether to accept that tag, or we'll cover a lot of that. I've got some slides coming in here. Question was about how do we do airtime fairness, or whether we can do airtime fairness with this. There's a lot more factors that we can manipulate here. Wait. All right, OFDMA, the allowed RU positions for 80 megahertz. This is uplink. Now, uplink gets a little more complicated because downlink, I'm putting together one packet from one radio, right? I've assigned you an RU56. I've sent you an RU56. You're to send me back an RU56, and we've agreed to your offset. We've agreed to which iteration, which packet interval you're going to be on. I've got you timed out, right? And you and 12 other clients are going to send at the same time just your portion of that frame. So you're going to hit me with a header, but you're going to give me just the portion of that frame. That does 2 things. One, modulating 2 megahertz takes a whole lot less power than modulating 20 or 40 megahertz. Start to see where battery savings might come in. The downside to this is at the AP, I need to hear all of you at about the same time at relatively the same power for my radio to put you back together. This is working. The first mandatory certification for 802.11ax or Wi-Fi 6 is uplink and downlink OFDMA. So the first wave of this is not going to have BSS coloring and some of the other things you've heard about. The first phase of this is making everybody work with uplink and downlink OFDMA. So what I will say about this is it's definitely worth looking at, and I'll give you some more reasons here in a minute. Don't be afraid of it. There's a lot of people working together to make this happen because we absolutely need to do it. Everything is becoming real time. From the keynote, we identified tons of people who were transmitting the keynote as it was going on. So we're going to need this. All right, so OFDMA out of the box is multi-user, right? It's not multi-user MIMO, but it is multi-user Wi-Fi because I can mix and match multiple users within the same transmission space. If I send one packet, I have one amount of airtime on the air. So this is going to drastically reduce that airtime. You had a question?
What happens if you have overflies with OFDM?
Don't know. Working on that right now. That's the question. How effective is this if I have non-AC clients or non-802.11ax clients, right? A couple of things break on that, and I'll touch, but I don't really know. What I do know is when we've seen other protocol changes with AC mixing with AN or AN mixing with A, as the percentage increases, every client that is capable of using the next technology does go faster and your overall experience of airtime utilization goes down. So there's definitely benefit even if you're not getting all the benefits for all the clients. But this stuff works legacy too. It doesn't just transmit OFDM-A, it does transmit OFDM. So if you've got an end client or you've got we've done a really good job on backward compatibility. I think. It's very rare that you have a client that is not the same technology as the AP that flat won't work.
In marketing has done something about that with Wi-Fi 6 because people understand the difference between 5 and 6. They don't understand the difference between N and AX and AC.
No.
So if you have an iPhone and you say this is an iPhone 8 and iPhone 10, I want the 10.
Yeah.
If you have a new laptop and says Wi-Fi 6, this is the one I want. I don't want the Wi-Fi 5.
Right. Okay, so marketing has done a really good job of this, and that is an accurate statement. Wi-Fi 6 is definitely better than Wi-Fi 5. And Wi-Fi 6 may actually be better than 5G. You may have heard lately, has anybody heard the spiel that why would anybody do anything besides LTE? Yeah, okay. Really? Yeah, that's a concern. Is somebody decided to stop deploying Wi-Fi and go, you know what, you can do that. How many people have had every bit counted by their service provider? Had that bill at the end of the month? Do you want your entire network running in a cloud that you have no control over and you just have an SLA on? It's the way we used to do things. I think there's still a good play for Wi-Fi. The thing to remember is OFDMA and Wi-Fi 6 is that it is a 5G contender. It's a 5G technology. And with all of these RUs and everything else, we're actually working on methods to map what's the holy grail. If I walk into a building, I should come off of LTE, I should go onto Wi-Fi, because as a user and your users, and maybe you still care, but I don't really care anymore, all I want is to be connected to the internet. I don't care how I get there. My job depends on being in contact, all right? My job also depends on fixing a network now and again, but my job depends on being able to be reached and communicate with other people. And as my boss likes to say, life is about moments, and you never really think about your network connection until you're 5 minutes late to a conference call with your boss. That's a moment. So if you don't think about that, there are multiple technologies, and what we know in this industry certainly is one technology will not solve all your problems, right? So I think there's room for everything, and there's better integration here, so keep that in mind. Right, any more questions?
For the uplink does that imply that with clients at different distances that we control over transmit power of client?
Great question. Uplink OFDMA, if clients are at different distances, do we control their uplink power? Yes and no. There's a facility for that. I'll cover it in here. 2, we're going to group clients by location. all right? So it makes sense that if I've got 6 clients in my northeast quadrant that are relatively the same distance, that I include their information in one frame, and that's the first strategy, is grouping clients by distance and apparent location, which will work. Yes?
How resilient is this to highly mobile clients? For example, people whizzing around on phone pivots.
Don't know. I got a one-side conversation right now, but it should be better. Keep in mind, OFDMA is what LTE runs on. This is not new stuff. If you've ever looked at other radio technologies, it cracks me up sometimes when I look at the problems we have in Wi-Fi, because we solved these problems 10 years ago in other spectrums. Wi-Fi, because of its ubiquity, because everybody has a chip, is extremely popular and a little slower to change, okay, because we don't have control over the market. How many times do you get a new phone? How many times did you see the size of your phone go down and the number of cells going up go up, right? This is what your carrier did. Every 2 years you get a new phone. Why? Because the technology on their network gets much better if you get better technology. They can sell more of the same bandwidth. So same thing happening here. In the downlink and the uplink mode, we are multi-user today. Any RU that is a 106 or bigger can also be spatially multiplexed. So within an RU that is 106, if I have 8 spatial streams, I can plug 8 clients into that at 1 spatial stream apiece, theoretically. Right? This is about what I did after that. So wait, you're giving me multi-user Wi-Fi, really multi-user Wi-Fi. I haven't even touched spatial streams yet, and on top of that, I can spatially multiplex? That's a lot more capacity. So this is where we start to see where that 4 times higher capacity comes from. I listen to all this stuff on AC and N, and I know when I see a marketing number that says 4 times, I'll be happy if I get 2 out of it, right? I want to talk to somebody who's really doing this and find out what the that depends is. But this starts to move a lot more of that depends out. So MU-MIMO is actually realistically achievable and demonstrated now with OFDMA. M-Link MIMO didn't work in 802.11 AC, but we've gone from 384 kilohertz subcarriers down to, I forget what the current subcarrier is. We've got a lot more stripes in that frame now, and that means a lot better radios can do a lot more with them. So I'm really bullish on this stuff. EDCA parameters, 2 types of uplink transmissions. There's scheduled and there's unscheduled. Okay, so when a station joins an AP, we will negotiate with that station and we will say, look, can I give you a time slot? Can I control things? The station can say, nope, I want to contend the old-fashioned way. Why? Because clients always make their own decisions, right? If that decides that it doesn't want to do that, it can come back later and we'll talk to it, all right? The other thing that's important, and I skipped over that, I know. I just put this slide in, sorry. Okay. Right now, today, I'm sorry, guys, I think I got out of order on this. I'm just going to look at that for a second. Right now, today, because OFDM is so rigid and Wi-Fi is so rigid, LBT, or listen before talk, my contention threshold, the mechanism that says, look, I'm not going to talk over you, we're going to take turns, right? That method today, if anything's over minus 82 dBm, by law, I'm supposed to clamp down and not transmit, right? In reality, in this very hall, we are a lot closer than that, and in high client density, we're designing cells for minus 60, right? So if I design a cell for minus 60, but I got to listen to minus 82, I'm never going to get anything done. I can tell you in the keynote, we had, was it 88 5 gigahertz interfaces in there yesterday? We were used the channel plan 5.7 times yesterday in the same room with concrete and metal wrapping it. I know. But we used antennas. It's very expensive to put this capacity together. You got to design it. Antennas aren't cheap. Good antennas aren't cheap. Think of an antenna like a speaker. What happens if you put cheap speakers on your stereo? Yeah, you can hear the music, but it's not particularly pleasant. A good antenna makes a huge difference. We can isolate those cells from one another. So that's a very real problem that Wi-Fi has today. And what does that mean? If I'm at minus 82 dBm from my threshold, my coverage on this, that's 100 square foot blocks there. My impact zone at minus 82 is huge. If I go to minus 76, which is what my secondaries are, that's still a pretty good size. If I drop all the way down to minus 72, which is where that's actually my tertiaries, minus 72 should have been last, it is. But that's a lot smaller coverage area. What that means is all the stations that are in that gray area out there, I'm no longer competing with to get on the air. So there's some definite advantages to isolating cells. It's how you make high density work, because each cell is a finite amount of bandwidth, right? So 802.11ax is going to make that better with something called BSSID coloring. And I actually love this part because it's a two-parter, right? With BSS coloring, I get the ability to identify stations that are on the same channel that are not my cell. Stations, cells, because I'm repeating those channels in that room. It's the only way I can get that many radios in there, right? And I do hear other stations that are on other cells. What BSSID coloring adds is a value in the header that gives me a color for my cell. Now I can do some special things, because we already know that if you are on a different BSSID, we might interfere with each other, but we don't have to listen down to minus 82. We're all operating at above minus 60. Why do I have to count every packet you send as an impact to me? Overlapping BSSs have been with us since 802.11n, and they've been challenging since 802.11n. So solving high density problems where it used to cost me equipment now probably can be done logically, and this is one that both the client and the AP need to participate in, and this is actually the most interesting aspect of AX to me right now, and how that's going to work in a mixed environment. We're gearing up right now, gathering data to do more simulations, and we aren't far away from getting some real stuff. So what BSS coloring gives me is a way to tell other cells from other cells. Now, a couple of things I can do with that. OBSS PD, for the first time ever, lets me offer a client the opportunity to turn his power down. And what will I give you if you turn your power down? I will give you a much higher CCA threshold. So if you're at the center of my cell, right? I know if you transmit at minus 60 or minus 40, your impact for interference from the center of my cell to that other cell that's not me on the same channel is null. So why don't I let you, as you get closer to the center of that cell, use a higher contention window? You're going to get on the air faster. Your life's going to be happier, right? And for that, I will just ask you to please turn your power down a little bit, so that we don't leak out. If we get everybody participating like that, and we are talking to the vendors, they're talking with us, it's a good idea. That also saves battery power. If your transmitter doesn't transmit as hot, you're saving battery power, right? The way that looks, the adjustable CCA threshold is between the CCA SD, which is the signal detect, and the ED. This is the first time since 802.11a that we've changed this. 802.11a said, if I hear energy at minus 62, then I have to obey that. And I have to drop down to minus 82 to make sure that it's not an 802.11a signal. When 802.11a came out, transmitters weren't that good and it didn't go that far. It was very possible to have somebody talking to you at minus 80 because they were out near the edge. So that was a good protection. Now, like I said, routinely I'm running with noise floor and 25 dB, I'm running minus 60. or minus 55 is where the conversation's happening. I really don't want a client outside of that. I want him on another cell. So that's going to become possible. So that gives us a couple of challenges and a couple of things to solve in RRM. We've got same channel BSS to contend with. We've got CCA adjustments and channel access rules. So we can enforce all of that from the RRM algorithm between the base stations. So I see a bright future for this. The other thing that we promise is some miscellaneous PHY features. Preamble puncturing, I am not entirely sure we're getting. That's in high debate right now, but it makes infinite sense to me. What does that mean? Preamble puncturing is, since I have all these RUs, and since 802.11 standard, the AX standard, and OFDMA says I don't have to modulate all those RUs, that actually gives me the ability to look at narrowband interference and say, you know what, he's only impacting 4 megahertz down here. Tell you what, none of us are going to use that 4 megahertz. You do you, dude, I'll do me. That's a cool feature. It could also lead to better DFS rules because radar signals are very narrow. And if they're not skipping around, you don't have to wipe 20 megahertz off because you got a 1 megahertz radar pulse. Dual carrier modulation. This gives us something too. In harsh environments for long distance, this is one of the IoT benefits, but it's good for anything at long distance, right? I can modulate 2 RUs at opposite ends of that frame in the spectrum, 2 different frequencies. Doubles the chance of getting through. All right, 802.11ax benefits. I've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go a little quick through these, and I'm going to give you some take-home reading. I apologize for not getting through all of them, but there was fluff at the end, which is there in case we don't get fast enough or too slow. 802.11ax and IoT, well, you got preamble puncturing, and I actually have the ability with Clean Air to tell you what it is. I can tell you if it's Zigbee or Bluetooth, and we could actually do some good mapping here, so I'm still bullish on PD. TWT, everybody's heard a lot about the long wait time, and this is what most people attribute the battery savings to, is that now, using 802.11ah rules, with OFDMA, I can tell you it's okay to sleep for 5 years. You giggle. It's in the spec. The problem is IoT devices are what? Usually built to be inexpensive, right? Usually on battery. What do you think the odds are that I could give you a couple of milliseconds 5 years from now and you're going to wake up on time and hit it? It's our next challenge is time sync, right? So 5 years may be impractical, but it's a number we can go to. So that's a real benefit, right? And the capacity is huge, which is important. How many of you are deploying IoT now or being asked to consider it in your plans? A lot more of you are going to get that opportunity. I don't plan to talk to the internet because I'm kind of private that way, but I'm starting to see thermometers and things like that pop up in my house, and IoT's coming. I refuse to have my refrigerator talk to the internet. So with a single 2 megahertz RU at long distance at low data rate, I can pop 375 kilobits per second. I can get up to a meg at a closer distance and a higher data rate with a 2 megahertz RU. So that's not chintzy capacity. Keep in mind, everything in Wi-Fi is latency, about latency, right? When you get 2 megabits per second, right, you get a lot of packets in a second. So there are little bits of data going out that actually add up to that speed. But it's low power consumption too, because again, 2 megahertz costs me a lot less to modulate than a full wideband. And I only have to send my 2 megahertz or my 4 megahertz or whatever I've been assigned. So that contributes to battery life and makes a good argument, right? We were only allowed 6 megabits per second under any of the OFDM. That was the minimum data rate we could make, was 6 megabits per second, right? Well, with the RUs now, we can actually drop down. So we wasted a lot with the old stuff, right? And OFDMA, really, they wrote this for IoT. Part of it, Dual carrier modulation, long distance becomes easier, right? And more reliable. Gas fields, power companies, things like that. We've looked at radio on that a lot. Latency is always a killer for it because they need very fast acting time. Distance has been a problem for it. Uplink OFDMA, UARA. So when I do triggered wait time, which is what TWT was, we agree on a contract on when you're going to wake up and when I'm going to listen for you. We've got time slots, I'm scheduling you, we shake hands and agree on that when you join me. But you get the choice, like everything else. The client can say, you know what, I don't like that. Or what happens if I blow my slot? I've got 2 reserved. They're called UARA. So I've got 0 and 2045 reserved. And that is where if you're a new client coming in or you're an existing client that lost his way, you can broadcast and play with normal contention rules on either one of those time slots and get back into the scheduler. So it's pretty well thought out. What are we going to see in AX? This is going to be required reading later. M is mandatory. O is optional. How many times have we had problems in the specs when it says the difference between shall or may? The top part of this is shall, the bottom part is may. And I will tell you that there's a lot of manufacturers and a lot of client makers that are now talking with each other about how we can take advantage of this. So what I hoped you got from that was this is really different. So pay attention because Wi-Fi is going to change forever, in my opinion. I may stand in front of you next year and say, so it's a little longer journey than we thought? But we got to go this way. I mean, I'm seeing networks that we built that were phenomenal capacity 3 years ago are near the breaking point. We're redoing this place. Probably we're starting to plan it next year, which means I have to come to Barcelona a couple more times and dock on it. It won't be a winter either. A couple of high density stories, and this is really all I had left. We're going to get out of here pretty much on time, I think. Monash University, I don't know how many of you follow Twitter real closely. Absolutely. God, you already have access points. I only get to retire if you keep buying them. I'm kidding. Partly true. Yeah, we are going to have new access points. I can't talk to the timing of that. If you want to go up to the World of Solutions, there's a couple of product managers up there who will dance delicately around that. It's, you know what, we have seen a continual thing in this industry, everybody being first. You remember the first AXAP that was released? Did any of you hear how that was rebooting every 10 minutes? You probably didn't. I've seen a couple of AX access points recently in close proximity, and the lights stay on all the time. So hold on. I think by this spring we'll have clients and APs, and you'll get to start putting your hands on it. Is that helpful? So, not yet. Soon. All right, so these guys had a challenge. If you take a look at that picture, they had an entire gymnasium, and they were going to plug a bunch of students into it to do online testing interactively. And the ceiling was high. It was a temporary installation. So they actually went under. If you guys have talked with me about high density before, under seat is my last option, the last one I want to take, but it's still valuable. They did. They used FRA for it. It calculated correctly. They shoved everything under the table, 647 clients, and they maintained their SLAs easily. Bottom of that has got Nathan's Twitter handle. If you guys have a similar situation, give him a call. Cisco Live EU Barcelona, same crew that's here this year. These guys are dedicated. It's part of the reason I come back and work the knock, because we know each other. They're all a lot of fun. We have a good time putting this show on. Last year's keynote, we had 45 APs with 3800Es, all with antennas, 76 5 gigahertz channels, Gillaroo antennas, and we reused the channel plan 4.2 times. We've got this cute little blonde-haired gal who just loves to exceed last year. So this year, we went to 55 APs, and we reused the channel plan 5.7 times. I think next year she's going to scale that back just a little bit. We got away with it, but it didn't look real pretty. But this is what can be done with a good design and antennas. Total stats from the show last year, we had a bunch of folks on this network. Now this network's running on all 9Ks. 632 APs were deployed, 24 AP groups, 3 WLC HA pairs, same thing we're running this year, except this year we are running across all 9,000 switches in the venue. Mobile World Congress Barcelona is where we get to check the glue on all of this stuff, because here we wind up with a peak number of clients at about 28,000, 30,000. How many of you are here in higher ed? How many of you see 30, 40,000 concurrent users on your network at any one time? We're doing this largely on the 800 APs that are installed in this hall. When we did it the first time, we had 30,000 concurrent, and we did it on 500 APs. That's a lot of users per AP. 1,460 APs are deployed now. This includes the other facility that's down on Plaza España. 97 RF profiles and 324 AP groups. Mobile World Congress is special. Every AP in the hall over top of a vendor's booth broadcasts their own vanity SSID. It's a nightmare to configure, and that configures 10 megs long. The keynote area at Mobile World Congress, the first time last year, we got an opportunity to look at the channel utilization and the user counts on each 5 gigahertz interface. And what we found was in that keynote with 2,000 people jamming, everything was happy, everything was fine. This year we're pulling telemetry from it, so next year I'll have a lot more slides to talk about it. Total users, close up, book sprints, books we've written on the team. These are other sessions that I think you'd be very interested in. If you get an opportunity to, take a look at it. It covers information I couldn't in detail in here. And the young lady at the back of the room looks like she's getting anxious. There's my reading list. Thank you guys very, very much for being here today. I appreciate you coming out early this morning. Please fill out the reviews. I do read every single one of them, and that's exactly what I will try to do in the next session. So it's important. Please fill out the reviews for me, and have a great show, guys. Thank you.